reverse side of goodness sometimes has irreparable consequences, but people still continue to do good deeds and do not wait for reciprocal gratitude. In our story, a sincere act done years earlier not only completely changed the lives of all the heroes, but also resulted in death. At 4:45 a.m. on March 2, 2018, Travis County, Texas police officers received a call from a woman seeking help. She reported that she was hiding in a closet when she heard several gunshots in the house, and the likely gunman was still inside. During the phone call, the dispatcher asked the woman not to come out of hiding and to wait for police officers who were on their way to the house. Minutes later, the house was already cordoned off by police, and the woman in the closet turned out to be local resident Corey Shaughnessy. The woman's condition was very discouraging. Corey did not understand what had happened and was very frightened. In the kitchen, her husband Theodore Shaughnessy was lying in a pool of his own blood near the table. Sit back, because today we are investigating another tragic case together. Theodore Shaughnessy was born February 7, 1963, and was the youngest child in a large family Shaughnessy who lived in Arizona near Phoenix. Ted, from an early age, loved fast cars and everything associated with them. As a teenager, he literally dreamed of sports cars. Theodore grew up absolutely fearless man, for whom adrenaline was the best way to cheer up and feel the taste for life. Nevertheless, he was a kind and cheerful guy, a good friend, and a good son. At the age of 20, Ted met Corey Garman at a local arcade. The young men immediately liked each other, as they had a lot in common, including a love of jewelry and books. Sympathy quickly turned into true love, and in 1989, they were married. After their marriage, the Shaughnessy couple moved to Austin, Texas, where they quickly settled in and launched the family business opening Gallerie Jewelers. It was a high-level operation that the Shaughnessy family built together. Corey had a passion for gemstones, fine art, and worked as an appraiser for the entire family company. Ted, on the other hand, was the face of the store, as he had a talent for connecting with people, and they were not just drawn to him, but were infused with his energy. He was very friendly and active, because wherever he went, he became the soul of the company. This quality perfectly helped in business, as he could find a common language with clients and partners and achieve the best conditions for all parties. The business became quite successful, and after a while, the family fortune was estimated at $8 million. But despite the wealth, Theodore always remained generous and attentive to others. He often bought food for the needy and regularly made donations to charitable foundations. The family business continued to grow, and the couple purchased a beautiful new home near their store. The couple complemented each other and seemed like the perfect tandem. Indeed, everything seemed almost perfect, if only for one thing. The couple had no children. As the jewelry business grew, Ted and Corey decided to expand their family as well. In 2000, they made a life-changing decision and adopted a 16-month-old boy, taking him from an orphanage in Ukraine. It was just instant and unconditional love. The little gray-eyed boy was named Nicholas. Such a long-awaited event completed the family life of Shaughnessy, because now they had everything for absolute happiness. Nicholas grew up an active and obedient child. He loved animals and cars, just like his dad Ted, because he often took the boy with him to the track. Father and son went karting together, rode sports cars, and regularly spent time together just walking in the park. In high school, Nicholas became interested in car dismantling and even launched his own small business, in which his parents helped him with finances. The young man bought the necessary equipment and enlisted the help of friends. In the same period of time, Nicholas met Jackie Edison. Immediately after meeting, the young people felt a mutual attraction, but after meeting Nicholas's parents, they did not like the young lady. Corey felt that she was not suitable for him, but despite this, no one prevented the relationship of teenagers in order not to lose touch with Nicholas. After a while, Jackie was able to win their favor and started spending so much time at the Shaughnessy house that they let her move in. In August 2017, Nick and Jackie moved away from his parents to start a new life in College Station. She at school and he as a day trader, with financial support from his parents. The young man was very attached to his parents and tried not to cut ties with his family and made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit them. Everything seemed to be going well in his life, and nothing seemed to portend trouble. On March 2nd, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey awoke to the insistent barking of their dogs. This was generally a common occurrence, as the animals often reacted violently to small animals that might accidentally wander onto the family home's property. Corey thought there was nothing to worry about, and the dogs would quiet down in a few minutes, but Ted decided to check it out. He armed himself with his .40 caliber pistol and went to check the house. Corey laid her head on the pillow and almost immediately fell back asleep. It was only a few seconds later, however, that she heard a gunshot in the kitchen, followed by a series of more shots. Frightened, Corey grabbed her revolver, which was always next to the bed, and went to help her husband. But on her way out of the bedroom, she saw her favorite dog. A dog named Bart had been shot in the doorway. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in it and looked menacing. Corey was frightened and fired indiscriminately, firing all 6 bullets toward the door. Unloading the revolver, she hid in a closet expecting to be found and killed. Luckily, Corey was able to grab her cell phone and called emergency services to report that a criminal had broken into the house. She said she shot one of the attackers and heard moans coming from the room. While speaking with the dispatcher, the frightened woman repeated that someone was moaning, but she didn't know who was making the sounds and wanted to check. However, the dispatcher calmed her down and told her not to leave the shelter and to wait for the police. 15 minutes later, she was informed that the police had arrived at the house. By this point, the moans had died down and there was a sepulchral silence in the house. Corey stepped out of the closet and headed for the front door. As she passed the kitchen, she saw her husband in a pool of blood. He showed no signs of life, and shell casings were scattered around him. Overcome with terror, she reached the door and opened it, but there was no one on the doorstep. Coincidentally, the officers had the wrong house, as this street had an unusual precinct layout. The officers were on her neighbor's doorstep, trying to figure out which side of the street the shots were coming from. Eventually, they sorted themselves out and ran to the Shaughnessy family home. Waiting for them on the doorstep was a shaking Corey. Her life was completely ruined. She didn't understand what had happened. The police officers went inside and tried to calm the woman down. Corey called her son and reported the attack. She and Jackie immediately left for Austin and arrived at her parents' home around 8 a.m. Theodore Shaughnessy, 55, was dead after being shot multiple times in the head, back, and thigh. Family acquaintances and friends were horrified by what had happened. No one suspected that they could have deadly enemies capable of being shot at point-blank range in such cold blood in the middle of the night in their own home. After the tragedy, Nick and Jackie stayed in the house with Corey to give her the support she needed and to participate in the investigation. Law enforcement officers examined the crime scene. 2 different types of .40 and .38 caliber shell casings were found, which means the shooting was from 2 different guns. No signs of forced entry were found, but in the far bedroom, an open window with the safety netting removed drew attention. The perpetrators must have entered through it. Here, the forensic team also managed to find the first fingerprint, which was immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. Police spoke to several neighbors about the Shaughnessy family and if they saw anything suspicious. One neighbor told police that this was not the first time Shaunessy's home had been targeted, as they own a chain of jewelry stores. The police took Corey's pajamas, which she was wearing for examination, and also swabbed her hands for gunshot residue. Corey was honest from the beginning about the fact that she had fired her gun. The police began their investigation and quickly ruled out burglary, noting no forced entry and no stolen valuables. Shifting their attention to the murder investigation, they found that all the doors in the house were intact except for the entrance to Nicholas Shaunessy's room. The door had been opened. An examination of the room revealed that a firearm was missing from a dresser with a .40 caliber pistol drawer. It turned out to be the only item missing from the house. Given that the caliber matched one of the guns used in the massacre, detectives assumed it was the one used to kill Ted. Nick, Jackie, and Corey agreed to help the investigation in any way they could. Corey allowed the police to search her cell phone, and although Nick said he hadn't been in Austin in about a month, he and Jackie did the same. All three also agreed to answer questions at the station. The goal of the police was simply to try to get as much information as possible about the family and the events of that day to get on the trail of the perpetrators. Investigators were still unsure if the murder was part of a random attack, a botched robbery, or if it was a targeted crime. They found no unidentified prints at the scene, so they had to wonder if the sole surviving victim, Corey Shaughnessy, could actually have been a suspect. After all, she was the only person in the house. The police couldn't get past the fact that the shooters left Corey alive. They also found it odd that the shooters were in the house for 17 minutes before the shooting occurred, and nothing was stolen from the house. Assistant prosecutor Amy Meredith, who examined the scene of the tragedy, was certain that Ted Shaughnessy knew the attacker. She was also certain that the house was too big and too dark for a couple of random burglars or jewelry thieves to navigate it so quickly. Corey Shaughnessy was increasingly under suspicion because investigators believed she had a motive. Police learned that Corey was the beneficiary of Ted's $1 million policy. Their home and business were also worth a lot of money, but there was no evidence against Corey. But Corey wasn't the only family member who aroused suspicion. Shaunessy's son, Nicholas, who was more than 100 miles away from the scene of the tragedy at the time of the crime, also came under suspicion. On the morning of the tragedy, he was agitated, and one important moment caught the attention of investigators. After questioning him, he walked directly to a wide-open side window on the first floor. It was the window to his room. He went to that particular side of the house to look specifically at that window, which was not visible just from the front of the house. It was the exact window that the criminals entered through, but at that point, Nick had no information from the investigators about the criminals entering through that window. After all, how would he know the point of entry if he had no part in creating it? Police dug deeper into Nicholas's financial history and discovered that he had been struggling financially for a long period of time leading up to the crime. An important revelation was that Nicholas had borrowed $30,000 from his mother for the business, and she had recently written him a message reminding him to repay the loan. In addition, he owed a neighbor $20,600. These financial stressors represented a potential motive to commit the crime. However, the investigation took a more important turn when it was discovered that Nicholas was the sole beneficiary of a $2 million insurance payout in the event that his parents did not pass away. This detail intensified the intense scrutiny on Nick, making him a prime suspect in the eyes of the police. Nicholas's phone also caught the investigators' attention, specifically an app that gave him access to the alarm system at his parents' home. Corey told them that the family often chose not to arm the system and that it was disabled that night. But detectives noticed something in the account's history. Corey said they only used the alarm system when they weren't home. However, the system detected that there was an activation to open a window at 4:27 a.m. The system detected that there was an activation to open a window. About 17 minutes later, the system detected broken glass. Another surprise in the search of the home was Nicholas and Jackie's marriage certificate. It turned out that they were secretly married back in August 2017 and didn't disclose their secret marriage until after the murder happened. But the closer police looked, the more compromising evidence they found that Nick and Jackie were indeed planning to kill Shaunessy's parents. We remember that Nick was more than 100 miles away from Austin at the time of the crime, but phone records showed that he was lying when he said he hadn't been in Austin for a month. On February 28, just 2 days before Ted was killed, his cell phone use was recorded in Austin. Investigators wondered if he had been in town making final preparations. Nicholas and Jackie's phones were examined. They deleted several text messages that had been synchronized with Nicholas's computer. On February 24th, Nick sent Jackie a text message saying he was working on it. And Jackie's response to the text message was, "Do they want $50K or not? We can't afford to pay half that early." The police searched Nicholas and Jackie's apartment. Everyone was shocked at how many cameras were installed in the apartment. The cameras proved that they were at home on the morning of the day of the crime. They found jewelry, ammunition, and guns in the safe. One of the boxes of ammunition was the same make and caliber as one of the murder weapons. It was a .38 caliber pistol and was missing 6 bullets. In other correspondence, Nick asked Jackie to withdraw money from the account. So, if this happens, cash in hand. Jackie had withdrawn $1,000 from the bank just days before the crime. Authorities suspected it was no coincidence. During the investigation, investigators contacted the man who officiated Nick and Jackie's wedding, Nick's high school friend, Spencer Patterson. Although the attempt to contact him was quite difficult, the information obtained was another important piece of evidence to prove Nicholas's guilt. The fingerprint from the window in Nicholas's bedroom proved to be a dead end. It belonged to the man who installed the window. But police learned that Nicholas had used that window to sneak in and out of the house when he lived there. His best friend Spencer also knew about it. Spencer was interviewed by police. He also knew about where Ted and Corey kept the safe in their home. Police searched Spencer's home, car, and cell phone. In the car, police found a .38 caliber handgun. It was sent for forensics, but it was not one of the murder weapons. Spencer's cell phone also showed that he was at home the morning of the crime. Spencer was ruled out as a suspect, but he added to the piggy bank of suspicion against Nicholas. Spencer revealed that shortly before the crime, Nick talked about getting $8 million when Ted and Corey left. In correspondence between Spencer and Nicholas, Shaughnessy tried to hire him to kill the family. Steal all their stuff, no need for the mask because they will all die. Nick wrote. On May 29, 2018, police arrested Nicholas Shaughnessy and Jackie Edison for criminal solicitation. Corey couldn't believe it. The woman believed the authorities were trying to frame her son, who by then was working in his father's place at the jewelry store. Corey still believed it was a mistake. She said she needed absolute proof of their involvement. 2 weeks after the arrest, Jackie was released on bail. Corey hired the best lawyer she could find for her son. After the tragedy, in an interview, Corey Shaughnessy said, "You could have told me that aliens landed in the front yard, and I would have believed that rather than I would have believed that Nicholas and Jackie were planning to kill us." For months, Corey had been by Nick's side. She truly believed that maybe the kids were involved in something in College Station, where Nicholas owed someone money, or maybe there was something strange with illegal substances, or maybe he told the wrong person that his parents were jewelers. The woman was ready to believe anything but that her son was planning to kill them. But the police were certain that Nick and Jackie were behind the attack. It remained to find out who had shot Ted Shaughnessy, and that was no easy task. After all, the traces and evidence have exhausted themselves, and the investigation has reached a dead end. Time passed, and 4 months after the crime, Detective James Moore decided to review the surveillance video from Nick and Jackie's porch, recorded just 2 days before the attack. For a mother who had struggled for months to keep faith in her son, this was the final straw. Too much had happened to really point to Nicholas and Jackie's involvement, and Corey realized with horror that she had spent months harboring the very people who had planned to kill Ted and her that night. Surveillance footage from the front porch of the house proved to be a major twist in the case. The footage, recorded just 2 days before the attack, shows Nick Shaughnessy greeting 2 men at the front door. One of them is wearing a green t-shirt with Anderson written on it. Detectives rushed to the Anderson Window Company in search of the man from the recording. His name was Cameron Vosmek, and he wasn't home that day. But his wife answered the door, and quickly got their attention. She said that a few months earlier, a man named Johnny Leon had asked her husband to commit murder for money. But Cameron turned him down. Police ruled Vosmek out as a suspect. Johnny Leon was later called in for questioning, where he admitted that Nick had tried to hire him for $100,000, but he refused. He was arrested and revealed that he had traveled to Austin with Nicholas a few days before the crime. According to him, they parked in front of Shaunessy's house. Nicholas walked to the house, came back, and said he couldn't get in. Johnny claimed that he was not involved in the crime after that night. However, his cell phone showed that he was in Austin on the morning of the crime. Johnny did not give the name of the second shooter, but did give his cell phone number. He had been in contact with a man named Arian Smith. Smith claimed he was with his girlfriend and that she could provide him with an alibi. His girlfriend said that on the morning of the day of the crime, Arian left her in a motel room. He left in her car, and she tried to call him several times, but the boyfriend did not answer. Arian's girlfriend told police that he had been carrying a .40 caliber handgun for several days after the crime. The gun was recovered from a member of Smith's family. Arian Smith was arrested. Police also discovered that both men had arrest records. In fact, they had been arrested together for dealing in illegal substances earlier. Nick Shaughnessy and the two alleged killers were charged with capital murder. But by the spring of 2021, Amy Meredith left her job as an assistant district attorney. And there was a new district attorney, Jose Garza, whose office made the criminals an offer: avoid a possible death sentence by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of murder and serve 35 years with the possibility of parole. Leon and Smith agreed. Corey wrote Nicholas a letter and offered to accept the plea bargain. The sentence would be 35 years with the possibility of parole. In April 2021, Nicholas accepted the deal. He could be released when he turned 36 years old. At a hearing in April 2021, Nicholas Shaughnessy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years of his sentence. Arian Smith and Johnny Leon were sentenced to 35 years with the possibility of parole. Arian Smith told police that after they shot Ted, he heard gunshots coming from the bedroom and a woman crying. Smith said he begged Leon not to kill Corey and to leave the house. They left because they didn't want to be shot. From prison, Nicholas sent letters to his mom. Corey was finally able to see her son after he had been in prison for 2 years. Corey knew a lot of information about Nicholas and Jackie's case, but she still didn't know who had used the .40 caliber gun because the gun belonged to Ted. In a private conversation, Nicholas revealed that he had given his father's gun to Arian Smith. When this came to light, Corey was able to finally believe that Nicholas was indeed involved in the case. Neither I, my husband, no one in our family, nor any of our friends could ever imagine that Nicholas and Jackie would want us killed. Jackie tried to downplay her involvement in planning the crime. She claimed she knew nothing about it. The police knew she was lying because, based on the deleted text messages, she knew. She admitted that she had traveled with Nicholas to Austin several times, but said she had never taken Nicholas' words about massacring her parents seriously. Jackie divorced Nicholas while he was in prison. In March 2022, Jackie's charge was changed to conspiracy to commit a felony. In June 2023, Jackie pleaded guilty to attempted conspiracy to commit a felony. She was granted a suspended sentence, meaning she could plead guilty and receive probation. She spent 120 days in jail. She will be on probation for 10 years. Every year for 10 years on the anniversary of Ted Shaughnessy's murder, she will have to spend 2 days in jail. Nicholas was interviewed from prison. He said he wanted to impress Jackie and become rich. Ted Shaughnessy, a registered jeweler, and his wife Corey Shaughnessy, a certified gemologist appraiser, could have shared a prosperous life with their adopted son, Nicholas. Ted, who founded Gallerie Jewelers in Austin in 1995, achieved success, earning the family a respected name in their community, was murdered by son Nick, who put a dollar sign on his parents' lives and decided to take away their happy life. Currently, the victim's son remains incarcerated at the Clemens Unit in Brazoria, Texas. Arian Smith is serving his sentence at the LeBlanc Unit in Beaumont of the aforementioned state. Johnny Leon remains incarcerated at the Barry B. Telford Unit in New Boston, Texas. This is a story of exemplary transformation that society opened its eyes to too late. Sometimes kindness comes at too high a cost, and the person who seemed close becomes an executioner. Ironically, the enthusiastic Shaunessy's traveled to the ends of the earth to bring home a criminal. It is a pity that they, enamored with love for the child, could not convey to their son the simple truth of life that money is the most easily replenishable resource, but time, unfortunately, is not. In an interview Nicholas gave from prison, he sincerely apologizes to his mother. But is it possible to accept an apology that shouldn't be there in the first place? Throughout the years of investigation, Corey Shaughnessy has endured an incredible emotional journey to the realization that her own son hired hitmen to take her and her husband's lives for money, and she still loves her son, the same 8-year-old boy who lovingly hugs her in photos and races cars with his father. But that boy is gone forever, and so is the life Corey and Ted tried to build around him. Corey Shaughnessy currently lives in another state under an assumed name, and every day that passes she tries to find faith again in the people around her. Indeed, many people are far from what they appear to be at first glance. A chilling thought visits us throughout our story. The 2 people who tried to kill you were living with you in your own home. Take a good look around you. According to statistics, the number of crimes committed by juveniles has been increasing worldwide in recent years. There has been an upsurge in violence among school children, usually directed at their peers, and the victims are often hospitalized, disabled, or even killed after such incidents. Such hostile acts usually have one goal: to prove their own superiority, power, and permissiveness. Plus, the laws of many countries are lenient to juvenile offenders, which gives them faith in their impunity. The story of a French girl named Anes Maran, who died at the hands of a high school student, shook the whole country. They studied in a prestigious college with an impeccable reputation in which it seemed nothing like this could not happen. However, as it soon turned out, the perpetrator had attacked the girls before, but his wealthy parents managed not only to keep the case quiet, but also to arrange a son in a good school in another city, hiding the truth about his adventures. It is said that teenage aggression is a form of protest during the period of personality formation and search for oneself. But in our story today, this boy's cruelty was the result of a complete lack of empathy, the ability to empathize and sympathize with others. He was extremely dangerous to society and incorrigible, and therefore became the second teenager in French history to be sentenced to life imprisonment. Who was Anes Maran? Anes Maran was born in 1999, November 26th in Paris, and was the only child of the couple Paula and Frédéric Maran. The girl grew up in a fairly well-to-do family. Parents adored their child and sought to give her all the best. Agnès, from an early age, did not know anything to refuse. She was dressed in brand-name stores, taken to the sea, bought expensive toys and gadgets. Maran was an active, sociable, and restless child. She always had a lot of friends and hobbies. She showed creativity, loved music and movies, and in the future dreamed of becoming a film director. At school, she studied well, and teachers noted her high abilities, but often to achieve the best results, she was prevented by banal laziness and inattentiveness. At the age of 13, Agnès got involved with a bad company, which negatively affected the girl's studies and behavior. She started smoking, and not only regular cigarettes, drinking alcoholic beverages and skipping school. Her parents were not in favor of harsh measures of upbringing and several times tried to simply talk to their daughter, but the conversations did not lead to anything. The girl promised to correct herself and to stop communicating with bad company, but she lied. When she was once again caught smoking and drinking beer right on the territory of the educational institution, the question of her expulsion arose. Her parents realized that if their daughter stayed in Paris, she would continue to socialize with people who had a bad influence on her, and nothing would change. Therefore, Frédéric and Paula decided to transfer Agnès not just to another educational institution, but to send her to another city or even a province, away from the capital's bustle and temptations. A new school. After reviewing several options, Maran's parents opted for a closed private college, Savignol, located in the commune of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, which is in the department of Upper Loire region of Auvergne. It is a prestigious educational institution with almost a century of history. The college was founded in the 30s and worked on the principle of boarding school, where children not only studied, but also lived. However, by the end of the 2000s, the college faced serious financial difficulties and was actually teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. In a small community, with a population of only 2,500 people, young people increasingly sought to go to study in the capital or a major city, and therefore the local educational institution experienced a shortage of students and, as a consequence, a shortage of finances. Previously, to get into this college required a high grade point average as well as good characteristics. But even this did not guarantee admission because the competition was several people for one place. However, in 2011, the situation changed dramatically. Due to a large shortage of students, the school, in order not to go completely bankrupt, significantly reduced the requirements for admission, especially if they were children of wealthy parents who were willing to act as sponsors. Despite her behavioral problems, Anes had a good academic record and grade point average, which allowed her to get into Savinol College, and the authorities simply turned a blind eye to her characteristic. Agnes' parents were happy. They believed that the change would be good for their daughter. She would become more responsible and more easily overcome such a difficult transitional age. Maran was a very sociable, cheerful, and friendly girl. She was able to fit into the new team from the first days. She felt comfortable and quickly made friends. In addition, she showed good progress in her studies, including in new disciplines, which were not available in her previous school in Paris. Her parents visited their daughter at the boarding school every 2 or 3 weeks. They were very pleased with her successes, as well as changes in behavior for the better. Agnes came home to visit only once during her studies. It should be noted that the new school was located on a vast territory surrounded by forest. There were no clear boundaries, fences, and strict security because the crime rate in these parts was considered one of the lowest in the country. To get from the college to the center of the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon required no more than a quarter of an hour on foot, so students after school often went there in groups. But before 5 o'clock in the evening, all had to return back. There were disciplinary penalties for breaking the rules. The disappearance of a student. On November 16, 2011, Agnes, together with some of her classmates, decided to take a walk into town after class. There, she met a friend of hers, who studied in another school, but they often crossed paths and constantly called each other. The two girls decided to go shopping and fell behind the general company. A couple hours later, the young people returned to campus, but Maran was not with them. At first, this circumstance did not cause much alarm, and everyone was sure that she would soon return. But the time passed, it began to get dark, and the absence of the student seriously worried the teachers. Her phone was switched off, and she could not be found on campus, so the school management did not hesitate to report the incident to the police. The search began that evening and was conducted by law enforcement officers, teachers, and students of the school. They were divided into groups, each of which combed a different area, but no trace of the missing girl could not be found. No one had seen her and had no idea where she might be, but everyone hoped that she would return alive and unharmed. Marian's parents were notified almost immediately and asked if their daughter had returned home. Frederick and Paola were shocked at the news and rushed to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon as fast as they could. They assured them that Agnes could not have run away, for she had no reason to do so and had nowhere to go. According to them, their daughter liked her new school very much. She had made many friends here. She did not feel any discomfort, and she had no conflicts with anyone. The father and mother of the missing Agnes became actively involved in the search. They talked to their daughter's friends, posted pictures of her all over the city asking for help in finding her, and tried to find any clues or leads. What is Agnes's friend hiding? The first thing the police did was to look for people who were the last people to see the missing Agnes and who might have known about her future plans. Girls from her class said that Maran met a friend of hers in the city and went shopping with her, but no one could give her name. However, soon the law enforcers managed to find Estelle, the same friend from another school. The girl was indeed the last person with whom Agnes had been in contact, so she was considered as a very valuable witness. However, she did not provide any useful information at the first interview. She said that Agnes had helped her choose a birthday present for her father. Then they had a milkshake each and said goodbye. Estelle headed for her home, and Agnes had to return to campus. The girl's story sounded plausible, but her behavior seemed a bit odd. She was visibly nervous and seemed to be holding something back. They decided to talk to her again, and suddenly the story she had told began to take on some details that she wanted to keep quiet. Estelle confessed that Anes had planned to meet a young man that day, a man she had not told her the name of. Allegedly, it wasn't supposed to be a date, but the guys were going to do something bad, apparently taking illegal substances. A couple hours later, Estelle tried to call Agnès, but she didn't answer, and by evening her phone was turned off. The girl admitted that she lied at the first interrogation because Maran asked her not to tell anyone about the meeting with the mysterious guy, and she promised her that. However, when it became known about the disappearance of Agnès, Estelle decided to confess everything because she suspected that the sudden disappearance could be associated with this young man. It has been suggested that Agnès may have simply run away from college. The girl may have fallen in love and is now spending time with her secret boyfriend. Her phone was last online on campus the day she disappeared, but the device was turned off afterward and it was impossible to locate it. Nevertheless, police officers were able to quickly access all data regarding Agnès' calls and correspondence. It was then that the name of a 17-year-old Mathieu Moulinas, a high school student at the same school as the missing Maran, first came to the attention of the police. The first suspect. It turned out that the missing woman for the last few days corresponded with Mathieu Moulinas, but what could connect her with a 17-year-old young man, what interests they could have in common? In any case, the boy had to be questioned because he could have valuable information and shed light on the case. Nothing concrete or alarming in their correspondence could be found, but on the day of Agnès' disappearance, they were really going to meet on campus and walk together. Mathieu promised to show her something, but did not specify what it was. Moulin was first invited to talk to the police on November 17th. He behaved perfectly calm, but there were strange scratches on his face and hands that looked quite fresh. However, the young man admitted that he was dabbling in illegal substances, and yesterday he specifically overdid it, which caused him to lose consciousness and fell into a thorny bush where he lay for several hours. Classmates and educators confirmed that there were indeed problems with this student. Mathieu was admitted to Savenol College in January 2011. His parents transferred him here to supposedly protect him from bad company and problems. However, the young man even here used alcohol and various illegal substances, which raised the question of his expulsion. But he still felt sorry for him and was given time to improve. Moulinas looked like a typical rebel and troubled teenager. It was as if he challenged those around him with his appearance and behavior. He wore Gothic-style clothes, smoked and drank hot drinks right on the campus. He bragged about his antics to his peers, noting that he would not be punished for it. On the day of Agnès' disappearance, Mathieu disappeared for several hours. Toward evening, he came out of the woods in dirty clothes, with scratched face and hands, and to all questions he answered that he had had too much to drink and was passed out. Naturally, it all looked and sounded suspicious, but so far there was no hard evidence against him, and therefore the investigators decided to take a closer look at him. The spoiled son of rich parents. Mathieu Moulinas was born in December 1993 in the municipality of Négé-Solorgue in Garda, and was the eldest of 3 children of the couple Sophia and Dominique Moulinas. He grew up with his 2 younger sisters in a fairly well-to-do family, and from childhood was used to having his every whim immediately fulfilled. From an early age, he was observed some strange things. The boy was quite aggressive, irascible, hard to find a common language with peers, and tried to stay apart from other children. In adolescence, the situation worsened. Mathieu had outbursts of rage, he often started fights, began to drink alcohol regularly, and experimented with all sorts of illegal substances. But at the same time, despite his aggression and antisocial behavior, the young man had a very attractive appearance, thanks to which he became popular with the opposite sex. At the time of the described events in his hometown, he had a girlfriend about whom his parents knew and whom he visited on weekends. Mathieu had a number of records with the police, including the theft of prescription drugs from a pharmacy, which he committed with a friend. But the case was hushed up, probably thanks to money from the teenager's parents. He was also able to get into a prestigious private school with a low-grade point average and problems with the law because his father offered to sponsor the school when it was in crisis. During interrogations, Mulas behaved defiantly and arrogantly, but remained completely calm so that the police even doubted his involvement in the disappearance of Anes. The guy was constantly twirling a yo-yo in his hands, his favorite toy, with which he never parted. At the first interrogation, he claimed that he did not know Anes, but when he was shown a printout of their correspondence, he began to change his testimony, trying to lie on the fly, but quickly became confused in his own words. According to the guy, he promised to show Anes a clearing in the forest where mushrooms grow. Allegedly, they used them together, and after Mathieu became ill, and he fell into a thorny bush where he lay until the evening, and when he woke up, he saw that Maran was not. He didn't go looking for her, but just went back to the campus because it was getting dark. A lawyer hired by the parents of the Mulas was present at all the interrogations and recommended that his young ward show the place where he had last seen Anes and where they, according to him, used mushrooms. However, Mathieu said that he would not be able to find that clearing because they stumbled on it by accident, and he got out of there on autopilot, not really understanding where he is and what is happening around. But Mathieu's words were soon refuted by experts who found no traces of mushroom ingestion in his blood. Moreover, the scratches on his body were recognized as a consequence of a struggle. That is, someone scratched him with nails, and apparently, it was a girl. A gruesome discovery in the thicket. The students of the school who had seen Mathieu coming out of the woods that evening pointed out the direction from which he had appeared, and it was in that part of the woods that it was decided to make a large-scale, thorough search. At that time, there was still a faint hope of finding Maran alive, but on November 18th, searchers awaited a terrible discovery. In a small clearing, hidden in a dense thicket, was found badly mutilated and partially charred body of the missing Anes. Her clothes were torn, her underwear was missing. There were all the signs of violence, as well as traces of penetrating stab wounds. Doubt that this heinous crime committed by Mulas, no one had no doubt, but it was necessary to wait for the conclusion of forensic experts, as well as to obtain confessions from the killer himself. Actually, when Mathieu was told about the terrible discovery, he did not particularly repudiate and began to testify, telling how everything was. Confessions of a ruthless killer. The strangler confessed that he deliberately lured Anes into the woods to abuse her, but allegedly did not plan to kill her. However, she put up fierce resistance, scratched him, so he had to tie up the victim using the rope from his favorite toy, yo-yo, which he carried with him everywhere. Anes screamed and threatened to turn him into the police, which pissed the guy off. Going to prison he did not want to, and therefore decided to kill the unfortunate and get rid of the body. Mathieu brutally beat Anes, breaking her arm, nose, several ribs, and shin, and then gave her 17 stab wounds, most of which came to the neck, face, and chest. When the victim stopped showing signs of life, he doused her with a flammable mixture from a canister and set her on fire, hoping that the fire would completely destroy the body. Then he quickly left, because it started to get dark, and he did not see that the fire was soon extinguished. He took his toy off the dead body and took it with him. The high school student told about the incident calmly and in detail, as if savoring every word and watching the reaction of the detectives. He felt no remorse or pity for the victim. The examination confirmed that under the fingernails of Anes were particles of skin and epithelium Mathieu, and in her body revealed traces of biological fluid of the rapist. Also on the rope of the very toy yo-yo found sweat traces of both the perpetrator and the victim. After all the necessary studies and medical conclusions, Agnès' body was given to her parents, who buried their only daughter in Paris. It is noteworthy that the funeral took place on November 26, 2011, on her birthday. The first victim of a young psychopath. When law enforcers thoroughly took up the biography of Mulas, they were shocked by the fact that Maran was not his first victim, but this information was carefully tried to hide. As it turned out, he had been cruel to others since childhood, bullying animals, other children, and even his own sisters. He always took an incomparable pleasure in hurting others and watching them suffer. In August 2010, Mathieu attacked his young neighbor Julia, with whom he knew since childhood. The girl showed interest in the handsome neighbor, and he decided to take advantage of it. The guy lured her into the woods, where he hit her on the head, and while the victim was disoriented, tied her up with Scotch tape taken from the house, and then abused the unfortunate. Mulas then began to strangle her and probably would have killed her, but suddenly her cell phone rang. The perpetrator recoiled, looked around, and simply left the scene. A terrified Julia managed to free herself and called her parents, who immediately reported the incident to the police. Mathieu was arrested the same day. During interrogations, he cried, trying to appease the police, and also made attempts to shift all the blame on the victim, claiming that she herself provoked him, teasing and hinting at intimacy. But law enforcers understood that he had prepared for the crime in advance, and even took duct tape with him to immobilize the victim. Nevertheless, despite the gravity of the crime, Mathieu was not punished. The court took into account the very young age of the perpetrator, and instead of prison sent him for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic, where he spent only 4 months. All this time, psychologists and psychiatrists worked with him and evaluated his condition. In December 2010, the chief specialist, who was in charge of Mulas, gave a conclusion that he was fully rehabilitated, and after the course of therapy, he no longer posed any threat to others. The court, after reading this report, released the offender, requiring him only to attend several anger management sessions. Parental patronage. It is worth noting that the Molina couple also put a lot of effort into getting their son released. They promised the judge that Mathieu would leave the region and not cause any more trouble, and they also said that they would make sure that the heir would undergo therapy. They hired the best lawyers who did everything possible to keep their client out of jail. After that, the parents started looking for a new school for their son, but since he had a criminal record for such a serious article, they did not want to accept him anywhere. Then the father personally went to the provincial closed college Savinol and made an appointment with the director. He knew about the financial problems of the institution and immediately offered to sponsor him. When it came to the admission of Mathieu to the college, the director noted that the guy is too low academic performance, and the criminal case of a potential student could hit hard on the reputation of the school. But Dominic Moulinas, in every possible way, vindicated his son, lying that there was no violence, just his ex-girlfriend so tried to get back at him after the breakup. Allegedly, that's why he was released a few months later, when everything was sorted out. Surprisingly, but the leadership of the educational institution did not go into the details of the trial and accepted the version told by Dominic. Apparently, the amount of sponsorship he had announced played a decisive role, and they simply turned a blind eye to the crime and withheld this information from other students and their parents. The trial and the verdict. Mathieu had taken Agnès' life only a month before he turned 18. However, he was a minor at the time of the violent and brutal crime, and therefore the law provided for a lighter sentence for such offenders, and the trial itself had to be held in private. Agnès' parents insisted on making the sessions open, at least partially, with the involvement of journalists who would cover the case in the media. However, the Maran couple were refused, and the trial was held behind closed doors. The proceedings began only on June 18, 2013. The public prosecutor harshly criticized the numerous omissions in the case of Mathieu, in particular, the fact that the psychiatrist who gave the conclusion that the guy is not a threat to others was a young girl who did not have the proper qualifications. She had no previous experience with criminals and made a fatal mistake. The defendant underwent a second psychiatric examination, and experts concluded that not only is he unrepentant, but he may well commit a similar crime again if given the opportunity. Mathieu himself confirmed this, stating that he enjoyed watching the victim suffer. Moulins was diagnosed with symptoms of schizoid and paranoid disorder, which together with outbursts of uncontrolled aggression made him extremely dangerous to others. However, he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible for them before the law. Moreover, the prosecutor insisted that the young man be tried as an adult due to the brutality of his crime, and his request was eventually granted. On June 28, 2013, Mathieu was found guilty of abuse and murder with particular cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and forced psychotherapy. He became the second juvenile offender in French history to receive such a harsh punishment. Moulinas's lawyers decided to appeal the sentence, but on October 10, 2014, a jury of appeals upheld the life sentence, ending any possibility of a review of the decision. In 2016, Mathieu's parents wrote and published a book in which they described their bitter experience and admitted that their son remains unrepentant. The case of Nancy Paola Reyes Gorcys. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits, but sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paola Reyes Gorcys has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorcys had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala, little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paola Reyes Gorcys. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorcys, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorcys worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters,
who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. A fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Garcés was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Garcés was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Garcés ominously stated that if anything happened to her, or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Gorsay's family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages, asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Gorsay's, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now, before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment, for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor, who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos's movements from August 20th to the 26th, using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Mancy Gorseys, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorsi's, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. The city of Welcome in the Free State Province is the youngest and most dynamically developing city in South Africa. It was founded in 1947, following the discovery of the largest gold deposit in the area the previous year. Its name translates from Afrikaans, one of the country's official languages, as greeting. Despite its welcoming name and its industry-forming gold mining, it gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Vanek was born on August 14, 1987, in the young and developing city for gold miners. He became the only brother to 4 sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Hendriana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people. To provide a decent life for their children, the head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind, showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked in his field at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, the 23-year-old hero of our story registered on a dating site. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from a breakup and make new acquaintances. It seemed that luck smiled at him one day. Among the numerous photos and profiles, a lonely young man took a fancy to the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. During the ensuing correspondence, the guy learned that their interests coincided. She, like him, disliked noisy parties and drunk companies and wanted to find true love and build a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised that he could find a suitable candidate on the internet. Since the young man still lived with his parents, he shared his joys and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, the son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it. To please the girl, he withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in the silver Peugeot 207, a gift from his parents for his coming of age. As tradition demanded, the girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan, since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world. Chama van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children, even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chana suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chana was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a house guest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chana. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chana befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chana ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later, when Chama became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chama's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college where she studied art and graphic design. After Chana lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chana found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chana. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chana's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chana unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Azazel, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chana's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martins. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martins van der Merwe. Martins van der Merwe was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chana, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martins believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened and his behavior changed. Due to problems at school and home, at the age of 14, van der Merwe was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martins once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs. It made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martins dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake: general insanity. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chana. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chana on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Van Heerden was incredibly happy. No one could have imagined what terrible dreams the couple nurtured. Instead of dreaming of traveling and children, they wanted to end their lives. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter. It all began when Chana posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Vanek responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chana targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chana and Martins meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life, and even the setting. Chana approached the date fully prepared. The trap. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martins. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chana intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Pleased with their conquest, Martin slit his throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing: they had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator, as if they were groceries. After Van der Merwe had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The victim. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls. Even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place, he should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. At the same time, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the bloodstains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Van Eck. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination confirmed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds. Signs of his struggle were evident. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators had the mercy not to do this while he was still alive. Meanwhile, experts noted that the dismemberment was performed with professional precision, indicating that the perpetrators had significant experience in this area. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved. The number of wounds, their nature, and the strength required to subdue the victim clearly demonstrated this. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Vanek. Time to gather stones. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chama van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martens van der Merwe. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group ending of a life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father but everyone present. Her boyfriend Martens also behaved defiantly. As the case gained public attention, he did not hide his pleasure from the public scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives. But the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live, the lair of monsters. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chana, depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martens later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl later on. Eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martens and Chana underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. Punishment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chana took place, treating her as a serial offender. Despite this being a singular incident, she did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not. She can only grasp the gravity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chana van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martens van der Merwe, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chana pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, the mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. Michael's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martens van der Merwe was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Life after. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martins called Chana a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spell out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chana ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst, maniacs, offenders, cannibals, have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. Remarkably, Martins also developed his own fan club. For a long time, police monitored his followers to prevent them from emulating his actions. The convicted man continued treatment and completed his education through correspondence courses. Thus, a good-natured young man became the victim of a terrible scheme by two mentally unstable individuals. Driven by their own desires, lacking restraining mechanisms and societal norms, the perpetrators decided they had the right to take another person's life. Yet what is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return.
A crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offense is punishable by death at the hands of relatives, can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often, the perpetrators face no punishment, and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Sami Shahed's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahed family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahed and Matiaz Shahed emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori, located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province. They moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter, Sami, was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mita was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines. As his business prospered, he helped 2 of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahed family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Mohammed's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance,
used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father who paid for all her whims and desires.
Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahed had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents' and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chowdhury Muhammad Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shakil was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shakil as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chowdhury would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage. And given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Sami was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Sami and Chowdhury in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Sami happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shaquille, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Sami finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims, but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Sami noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad, her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shackle was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Sami confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future. She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Sami was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Sami immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahed decided to speak with Shaquille and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage. recognizing that Shahed had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the Nika religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Sami confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Sami was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Sami nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Sami finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport. A new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sami was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahed wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shahed family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016,
Shahed arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shahed called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly, and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However, this version was contested by Shahed's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Muhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shahed died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Muhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, after the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, an investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shakil was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami, in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shakil, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Mohammed denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained.
In court, Shaquille recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Anes Shahed, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once happy Shahed family. The price of love. What determines our future? Definitely the decisions we make and the actions we take. However, sometimes chance intervenes in the usual way of life, and then they say that you can't escape fate. Also happened to the heroes of today's story, Joseph and Olga Connell, whose life paths crossed in an unexpected way, after which the couple never parted. Unfortunately, the lovers could not enjoy each other to the fullest, as they were destined for a terrible fate. Around 2 a.m. on September 23, 2013, a series of gunshots rang out near the Paladin Club condominium in Wilmington, Delaware. When eyewitnesses ran to the scene, they saw a man and a woman lying on the ground. A little later, a call went out to emergency services. The caller reported the attack and its victims. Medics arrived and administered first aid. Despite the gunshot wounds to the face and loss of blood, the victim was alive, which could not be said about her companion. The bullet-riddled man showed no signs of life. Apparently, he was killed instantly, shot in the back of the head. Unfortunately, time was running against him. Realizing this, police officers questioned the woman about what had happened. In response, she uttered something inaudible and lost consciousness. The victim was rushed to the hospital. However, halfway there, she gave up her last attempts to fight for life and died. Working at the scene, specialists found personal belongings and documents. Connell's newlyweds turned out to be the deceased. All valuables, wallet, purse, cell phones, and even the diamond ring on Olga's hand were not stolen, which means that the attack was not an attempted robbery, but a targeted murder. It was later determined that the victims were attacked outside their home. After the young men returned home from celebrating their spouse's 39th birthday, the attackers acted in a treacherous manner and fired approximately 25 shots into their backs. Detectives had to figure out what interrupted the couple's love affair and whether the motive for the crime could have been a long-running domestic dispute. Connell family. Joseph was born into a successful and close-knit family. He was the middle child and had an older brother, John, and a younger sister, Kelly. During the younger years, the children often quarreled over nothing, but when their parents divorced, they rallied and became inseparable. After the breakup of relations, the guys stayed to live with their mother. After a while, another man appeared in the life of a woman. The new marriage turned out to be successful in all plans. The family still did not need anything, and the stepfather replaced the father. The family lived in a fairly quiet and cozy neighborhood. During the day, everyone went about their business, and in the evenings, everyone gathered around the round table and discussed personal events. Joe grew up a correct and persistent boy. However, these qualities were more about school and work. Otherwise, he was a fun-loving boy and the soul of the company. Even from an early age, the young man dreamed of starting his own business and to establish himself as a businessman. Thanks to his business acumen and resourcefulness, his efforts bore fruit. Together with his best friend, Christopher Rivers, the hero of the story became the owner of a machine store and a specialized store in Tullyville. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the young men as successful partners who had risen from scratch. The buddies were very friendly, moreover, burned a common idea, and developed their business. The story of acquaintance. Joseph was a convinced bachelor until he met a Russian beauty, Olga. Communication between the young people began on the dating site. They quickly found common topics for conversation, as they were already quite mature people with a lot of life experience. A female friend admitted online that she was in the process of divorce and had only recently moved to the United States. The man told about his experienced relationships and plans for the future. Both interlocutors were sociable and bright personalities, had similar interests and views on life. Therefore, it is not surprising that gradually their feelings grew into something more. One day, Joe realized that he no longer imagines his life without his beloved and made her an offer. Olga reciprocated. The only nuance was the fact that the bride has not yet been presented to the family. However, the man did not fear for this. He was confident in his choice and in the reaction of relatives. The beauty and character of the chosen one charmed his relatives. They were in shock that there was a woman who managed to melt the heart of a hot, loving relative. Relationships of the couple developed rapidly. Joe took Olga everywhere with him, proud of her appearance and charisma, therefore without shyness did not hide his love. However, over time it became clear that behind the female malleability and tenderness hides a real Siberian temperament where the beloved was born. Her irrepressible energy and entrepreneurial spirit amazed everyone. She seemed to be able to do anything. Connell was so delighted and in love that he decided not to postpone the wedding in a long time. Perhaps he was in such a hurry to get married, unwittingly anticipating the coming events. Such people are usually said, in a hurry to live. Surely each of you have encountered such examples in your environment. Investigation. After the attack, the police interviewed the crowd, bystanders and neighbors of the victims. Perhaps among them were those who could clarify something. Unfortunately, none of them had seen what had happened. However, many people heard gunshots which caused them to run away. There were even those who claimed to have heard loud male voices shortly before the shooting. They seemed to be arguing with the newlyweds about something. Violent crime ensued. Not far from the scene of the crime, forensic experts found a large number of fired casings that belonged to two different types of weapons. Thus, it became clear that there were several attackers. The sheer number of gunshots indicated that the couple was initially given a death sentence. It is unlikely that anyone would have managed to stay alive in such a shootout. To carry out their plan, the criminals waited for the young people to return from the party. The birthday party took place in one of the popular bars. Friends and some members of the Connell family came to the party. Everyone had fun and danced until midnight, and when they were tired, they went home. The couple parked their car at the house and headed toward the front entrance. It was at this point that the intruders found the most opportune time to carry out their criminal scheme. The next step in the investigation was to interview the family members of the victims. Officers spoke to Joseph's parents. They asked about the couple's alleged enemies and detractors. But the man's mother and stepfather replied that they knew nothing about it. At first glance, the newlyweds had no foes. On the other hand, there is hardly anyone who does not have envious people. In any case, none of the newly wedded spouses told it. At the same time, the detectives heard some curious information. It turns out that Joe and his sister Kelly had a spat on the eve of the wedding. It concerned an expensive family ring encrusted with diamonds. According to experts, its value was about $20,000. After the quarrel, relations between the relatives were not the same. However, all relatives claimed that Kelly would never have gone to the crime. Especially, it turned out that after the attack, the ring remained on Olga's finger. Nevertheless, the version about the hidden offense had to be checked. By a strange coincidence, on the unfortunate night, Kelly was one of the first on the scene of the crime. Despite the fact that the woman lived in another neighborhood, that time she was nearby. The ring story. The lovers planned to get married in the Virgin Islands. The only thing that marred the wedding preparations was the engagement ring. According to family tradition, the mother passed the family jewel to her son. However, the jewelry had already been given to the youngest daughter for the wedding, which took place 10 years ago. In order not to change the established custom, Joe discreetly took the ring from his sister and replaced the precious stones with zirconium. After that, he secretly returned the ring to the mistress and diamonds inserted into the setting of Olga's engagement jewelry. The deed of the protagonist is difficult to explain, especially given his financial situation. Perhaps in this way, he decided not to violate the established rules. It was assumed that none of the women should not have guessed it. However, things had not gone as calculated. Kelly noticed the switch and began looking for the culprit. When the younger sister learned of her brother's action, she was extremely outraged. Understandably, she expressed her indignation to Joseph. However, the latter was very upset, as he thought that the sister was angry for nothing and just wanted to violate family traditions and ruin the wedding. One way or another, but the ceremony took place. Kelly did not attend the event, citing employment. At the same time, in retaliation, the woman decided to mar the celebration and sent a sarcastic message to Olga, so the unsuspecting bride learned the truth. After that, the relationship between brother and sister became strained. Periodically between them there were altercations, often sounded mutual reproaches and insults, and the event that occurred afterward and completely knocked everyone out of the rut, a mysterious robbery. Joint life at the newlyweds began there in the Virgin Islands. During the honeymoon, the couple enjoyed marriage. Olga and Joseph sunbathed on the beach, swam in the sea, fished, rode on a yacht, and tried exotic cuisine. There was plenty of money for these purposes. Joe was proud that the business was booming and bringing in a tangible income, about $1 million a year. Back home, the newlyweds bought an expensive Mercedes car. The new convertible cost them $100,000. Since Olga did not belong to those women who are happy to sit on the neck of her husband, she began to help her husband. Olga was well-educated and well-read, well-versed in English, and also had an unprecedented charm. In addition, the past experience of working on the stock exchange came in handy. Therefore, she easily entered the business and engaged in administration. As soon as the lovely blonde took up the business, Joe and Chris had a lot more clients. A week before the attack near the condominium, someone broke into the home of a young family. While the couple were busy doing business, an unknown person stole jewelry and family heirlooms. The diamond ring was Olga's that day. After the Connell couple returned home, the head of the family noticed the illegal intrusion and called the police. Law enforcement officers examined the scene and surprisingly did not find any evidence. The search for the burglar yielded no solid results. Detectives put forward a version that the robbery was the result of someone staging or the work of a professional. That's why Kelly was under a lot of suspicion. As many believed, the sister had every reason to stage the crime. Perhaps over time, she could not forgive her brother for what he had done and decided to teach him a lesson. However, soon the investigation of the case came to a dead end. A more terrible crime happened to the spouses, and all the attention of detectives shifted to the investigation of a double crime. Search for motive. When detectives interviewed Kelly, she looked grief-stricken. The woman cooperated with the investigation and didn't hide anything. She told about the conflict with Joe and even showed correspondence about it. In one of the messages, Olga expressed the opinion that the recent robbery was organized by Kelly herself. However, Kelly denied it. But the investigation could not exclude her from the number of suspects, and, as the woman later admitted, exerted powerful pressure in some places. Despite the obvious motive, all the facts were to the contrary. At none of the interrogations did the victim's younger sister change her testimony, nor was she confused. During Joe and Olga's funeral, the sister looked broken. It was obvious that she loved her brother and was grieving the loss. At the same time, other versions of the murder were being considered. Joseph Connell belonged to the number of enviable grooms, and his wife was a rare beauty. Therefore, jealousy was not ruled out as a motive for the crime. Perhaps not everyone around the couple shared their happiness, and some of the former young people could hold a grudge, and after their marriage, to take revenge in life. However, the suspicions of detectives were not confirmed. During the investigation, it was found that Joe parted with his former companions on a good note. Moreover, they have long married and are happily married. This applies to Olga's past relationships as well. She divorced her Russian husband and cut off all contacts. However, an offended man would hardly take any measures to settle accounts with his ex-wife, and even more so, to travel a great distance across the ocean to do so. In this regard, this theory has been ruled out. Nevertheless, the search for enemies of newlyweds continued. At the same time, the investigators did not give rest to the subject of discord between brother and sister. Greed is a common reason for committing a crime. Therefore, after questioning Kelly, the investigation focused on Garrett Catalano, her husband. The man loved his wife very much and would do anything for her. It is likely that at the request of his beloved, he could have gone for a double crime. During the conversation, the potential suspect behaved calmly and convincingly. It turns out that he had a reliable alibi and also confirmed the innocence of his wife. However, Garrett expressed doubts that his brother-in-law made a multi-million-dollar fortune by honest labor. Catalano opaquely hinted that Joe may have been dealing in illegal substances. Over time, his words took hold. There were others who claimed that Joe was secretly selling steroids and making mad money from it. Secret witnesses identified another man we know as one of his associates. Thus, the detectives came upon a longtime friend and business partner, Christopher Rivers, best friend. Chris, unlike everyone around him, didn't seem to be worried about what had happened. He continued to lead his usual life. It was understandable that he had the double responsibility for the business. Meetings with suppliers, work with clients made him hold on, but still, his irrepressible vigor and strength of mind led to strange thoughts. One day, the investigators decided to talk to the man. He said that on the ill-fated night he was supposed to be present at the celebration, but could not show up because he was busy at work. Despite a long friendship and the premature death of his partner, Christopher unexpectedly spoke out unflatteringly. He said that Joseph had changed recently and was apparently unscrupulous. Rivers did not avoid Olga. Allegedly, he heard that the wife of Joe was not as simple as she wanted to seem and came to the U.S. to represent the interests of the Russian mafia. And a successful marriage only untied her hands. The words of the companion explained the high income of the family, but his suspicions needed careful verification. Perhaps everything the man said was just rumor and speculation, or maybe there was a good reason for it. However, Joseph's connection to the underworld soon became apparent. The information was not a secret and was publicly available. It turns out that a few years before meeting with Olga, her lover was accused of illegal possession of weapons, and even served a decent term for it. During his time in prison, the man managed to acquire new acquaintances. It is not excluded that after serving his sentence, local authorities pulled him into the trade in illegal substances. Perhaps over time, Connell crossed someone's path and they decided to take him out. But could the connections acquired behind bars have been the motive for the attack? The investigation was gathering momentum. While the detectives were working on the shady business, an interesting point came to light. Harry Cook, a well-known drug dealer, said he had heard Rivers make negative remarks about Joe on more than one occasion. Rivers accused his business partner of stealing. Chris Rivers admitted to him that he and his companion were selling illegal medical drugs through an auto parts store. But the buddy is greedy and distributes the profits unequally, while Chris is in greater need of money and has huge debts. And Joseph himself spends all the finances on an idle life. For this reason, Rivers joked that he wouldn't mind if his friend disappeared, and later seriously asked Harry if he wanted to help him in this, to which the latter replied no. Thus, the identity of Rivers appeared in a different light. In this regard, the investigation repeatedly questioned Chris. However, he had an alibi. At the time of the murder, the man was at home, which was confirmed by external and internal video surveillance cameras. At the same time, specialists decided to check his censures and studied the accounting documents of the firm. It turned out that, despite the large revenue, the business did suffer losses. However, as it turned out, numerous embezzlements have nothing to do with Connell. It was the stipulator himself who was responsible. Police informants reported that Chris has been using heavy substances for a long time, and lately his addiction has gotten out of control. This explains the numerous debts and shoplifting. Against this background, the man developed paranoia. That's why he repeatedly confessed to acquaintances that they want to kill him. In addition, it became known that he was personally involved in the sale of steroids.
and Joe blindly believed his comrade and was in the dark about what was happening in front of his nose. In addition, Joe's attention turned to the new relationship. This information became known thanks to the information of a mysterious informant, a sick mind. Detectives came upon the man after examining Rivers' phone records. He was known to make a lot of phone calls on the night of September 23rd. Despite being at home at the time of the crime, his phone did not go silent. All calls were subsequently cleared from the device, but experts had no trouble reconstructing the story. Most of the calls belonged to Joshua, a former FBI informant. When police contacted Joshua, he admitted that he often used Rivers' services. One day, Chris Rivers made him a tempting offer, $65,000 for his companion's head. The big money undoubtedly attracted the man. However, Joshua did not want to participate in the case directly and found other hitmen. To this end, he turned to Dominic Benson and Aaron Thompson. Mercenaries cost him $5,000, which he received from the customer as an advance payment. Eventually, the confusing crime picture came to light. The best friend had sentenced his buddy and his spouse to a sad end. Was the motive behind the crime a grudge and a desire for sole ownership of a shared business? No, it was the $1 million that one of the partners was entitled to as an insurance payout. It turned out that long before the appearance of Olga, the former partners had secured the business and insured their lives. In the event of the death of one of them, the other received the amount to pay off the mortgage on the machine shop. If Joe died, the amount received would be enough to pay off all of Chris's debts. But here's the problem. His partner got married, and all payments were due to the legal spouse. So Rivers decided to take out two of them at once. The conversation that took place between the organizer and his accomplice on the night of the crime indirectly confirmed this. Although the communications between the men were encrypted, it was obvious that Rivers was concerned about the success of the operation. To better analyze the communication between the two men, detectives seized phones from the four suspects. Thanks to the mobile devices, their movements on the night of the crime were recorded. Dominic and Aaron were at that moment near the house of the young couple Connell. Curiously, the video footage that confirmed Chris's alibi played against him. The cameras show that the man is nervous and does not let the phone out of his hands. After detectives reached out to Joshua, he didn't put up a fight and surrendered to authorities. To mitigate his punishment, during the interrogation, the man agreed to a deal with the investigation and testified against the customer. Thus, Christopher came up with a cunning plan. He wanted to use the quarrel between his brother and sister to frame Kelly. During the investigation, it was proved that the robbery at the Connell house was the next stage of the criminal plot. Following Christopher's instructions, Joshua broke into the couple's home and burglarized it. However, the head of the target was a controversial family heirloom, a diamond ring. Coincidentally, Olga was wearing it that day. If the plan had succeeded, the investigation would have followed a false trail and blamed everything on Joe's sister. But this was not enough for Rivers, and after the crime, he tried to blacken the name of his friend. As it turned out later, the death of Joe and his lover was the result of a cold-blooded and carefully planned crime for money, justice. In 2014, Chris Rivers was indicted on several charges. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, as well as conspiracy in the first degree and solicitation of a felony in the first degree. His co-defendants were also tried. The trials took place separately but parallel to each other. During the trial, it was proven that Aaron Thompson was the one who held the weapon. He was therefore found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. The felon received 2 life sentences and plus 45 years. His buddy Dominic Benson was acquitted on the felony charge because he changed his mind about shooting at the last minute. Therefore, for first-degree conspiracy and aiding and abetting criminals, he received only 5 years in prison. Thanks to his active cooperation with the police for the murder conspiracy, Joshua got the same sentence. As for the main instigator of the crime, Chris Rivers, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 50 years.
"We can forgive another person anything but success," goes the famous saying. Despite his young age, Joseph was a remarkable man. He built a business, found the love of his life, except that he was not left with the opportunity to enjoy happiness. Together, the couple could reach new heights, build a strong family, and have heirs. However, the thirst for profit and the dislike of his partner made irreparable adjustments to their measured life. Money, one of the old and common motives for crime. Christopher's pernicious addiction and greed ruined several lives. During his years in prison, the convict will surely be cured of his pernicious addiction to substances. But will he be able to stifle the guilt that is supposed to come with time? Unknown. Or maybe in his case, the voice of conscience will never be heard. After all, not everyone dares to spend the rest of his life in a constant struggle with himself. The Amato family case, when obsession turns a quiet individual into a monster. Like many serious addictions, which can be likened to severe illnesses with psychological, biological, or social underpinnings, this case involves a destructive habit, whether it's an urge for alcohol, prohibited substances, or gambling, or an obsessive need for a particular activity or interaction with a certain person or group. It's tragic when addiction affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones who strive earnestly to help. The once prosperous and happy Amato family faced such a dilemma head-on. As all family members were healthcare professionals, they believed they could handle the situation without external help. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, it was regrettably too late. This isn't a story of mere addiction, but of a young man's extreme obsession with a woman he had never personally met. Compounded by his addiction to forbidden substances and a pathological inclination towards theft, the situation spiraled into a horrifying outcome. Let's delve into this case to understand if there was a chance to alter the course of events and prevent the tragedy. The family home bloodshed. On January 25, 2019, a concerned man contacted the Seminole County Police in Florida. He reported that his close friend and colleague, Cody Amato, a nurse, unexpectedly didn't show up for his shift at the hospital, which was highly unusual for him. The day before, Cody had left work about 15 minutes early due to some urgent family issues at home, departing so hastily he even forgot to collect his pay for the day. Attempts to reach the 31-year-old Cody by phone were unsuccessful. He simply wasn't answering. His girlfriend, with whom he had been living recently, stated that Cody went to his parents' house the previous day at his father's request, but never returned to her place, and she too couldn't reach him. All these signs triggered alarming thoughts, prompting the dispatch of police officers to the provided address. The Amato family home, located in a suburb of Orlando, boasted a large adjoining area with a stable and a horse-walking area. Cody's car was parked in the driveway, and lights were on in several rooms of the house. At first glance, everything seemed normal. No signs of forced entry or struggle, with the doors and windows intact. When the sheriff's deputy knocked, there was no response, and calls to the landline also went unanswered. The police then sought permission to enter, and upon approval, cautiously unlocked the back door using a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, an eerie silence pervaded, though the lit room suggested someone must be present. Indeed, the homeowners were there. The officers first discovered the lifeless body of 59-year-old family patriarch, Chad Amato, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of his own blood, with 2 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest. Next, at the staircase opposite the main entrance, lay Cody, curled up and also deceased in a massive pool of blood. Lastly, they found 61-year-old Margaret Amato sitting at her computer in the home office. At first glance, she seemed to be napping with her head resting on her arm, if not for the blood splatters on the monitor and a large, spreading stain beneath her head. The murder weapon, an IUI Jericho 941 pistol found next to Cody's body, was later determined by forensic experts to have his fingerprints. With no signs of break-in or external presence and nothing missing from the house, it initially appeared that Cody, possibly after a family dispute, had ended their lives and then shot himself in the chest. However, smeared blood on the front door indicated it was locked by someone leaving the house after the incident. suggesting the perpetrator wasn't among the deceased family members. Regarding the likely suspect, there were little doubts. Those familiar or connected with the Amato family pointed to their youngest son, 30-year-old Grant, who had been missing since that evening. His car, a white Honda, along with some personal items including a laptop from Grant's room, were gone, implying that the owner had taken them. Grant was declared a person of interest, and a search was initiated for his whereabouts. What's known about the Amato family? Margaret Ann Amato, née Wade, and Chad Robert Amato tied the knot in the mid-1980s. Margaret, 2 years senior to Chad, was already raising a 3-year-old son, Jason, from a previous marriage. Chad wasn't deterred by her having a child. Instead, he was ready to raise Jason as his own. In 1988, the couple welcomed their first child together, a son named Cody, followed by the birth of their youngest son, Grant Tiernan Amato, on May 20th, 1989. From childhood, the brothers shared a close bond. Raised in a well-off family, they hardly ever faced denials. However, to earn certain privileges, they had to adhere to family rules, excel in school, help with household chores, and exhibit good behavior. They strived to be the pride and support of their parents. Both parents held advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret was a senior operational manager in a prestigious private clinic, while Chad, initially a clinical pharmacist, later shifted to software specialization. The family was quite affluent, living in a spacious suburban home with their own stable, breeding thoroughbred racehorses as a hobby. After finishing high school at 18, Jason left home, pursued university education, and started his own life. He got married, settled a family, and moved to another state, maintaining a close relationship with his parents and younger brothers. Cody and Grant were almost inseparable, attending the same school, joining the same sports team, and regularly visiting the shooting range with their father on weekends. The Amatos had an impressive firearm collection, including rare pieces, accessible only to the family patriarch for safety reasons. The youngest son, Grant, was the youngest of 3 sons in the family, and as often happens, he received the lion's share of everyone's attention and adoration. As a child, he was frail and sickly, so everyone tried to surround him with love and care. He grew up to be a modest and very shy boy, finding it hard to connect with peers, making his brothers his only friends. Grant became particularly close to Cody after their eldest brother Jason grew up and left home. After high school, the brothers pursued medical degrees together, eventually becoming anesthesiologists. While Cody excelled in his studies, becoming the top student in his class, Grant barely made it through with low grades. Nevertheless, both managed to land jobs in their field at a hospital. Cody earned a reputation as a reliable professional, but Grant frequently got into trouble, making errors and needing his work double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career at the hospital ended scandalously. He was caught stealing strictly controlled sedatives, which caused euphoria and hallucinations, and were used rarely for anesthesia. The discovery led to police involvement, and Grant was arrested. During interrogation, he admitted to the theft, claiming he administered the drugs to patients who, in his opinion, were under-medicated. Many believed Grant was using or selling the drugs illegally, though there was no direct evidence. He was immediately suspended and later fired. His criminal case for theft was eventually dismissed, reportedly due to his parents' intervention. Unemployed and internet-dependent. After losing his job, the 29-year-old man, already a loner, became even more withdrawn. He spent weeks indoors, glued to his computer, mostly browsing adult websites. Grant never had a girlfriend and struggled with social interactions with women, leaving him feeling inadequate. He indulged in viewing adult content and frequently interacted with webcam models on specialized platforms, trying to fill the void of a non-existent personal life. This private interaction, of course, came at a cost. Grant easily accessed funds from his parents' and older brother's accounts for these activities. This obsession quickly spiraled into an addiction, compounded by regular alcohol consumption. But Grant seemed content with this lifestyle, living off his family, spending their money without contributing anything in return. Eventually, his father issued an ultimatum: find a job soon, or he'd have to leave home and lose any financial support from the family. Grant promised his father to resolve the issue but had no real intention of seeking employment. He claimed he would become a streamer, earning by broadcasting video games. His parents, seeing this as better than nothing, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. Once everything was in place, Grant pretended to be streaming, asking for privacy, but in reality he was locked in his room, indulging in his favorite pastime, visiting adult-only websites. Trip to Japan. In August 2018, when Cody took a vacation from work, he decided to embark on a journey across the globe for a change of scenery. Dreaming of visiting Japan, he invited his younger brother Grant and his best friend Jeremy. While Cody and Jeremy had their own funds for the trip, earned independently, Grant's vacation was financed by their parents. However, rather than giving the money directly to Grant, they entrusted it to Cody, the more responsible of the two. The trip lasted nearly 2 weeks, and throughout it, Grant seemed disengaged. He showed little interest in tours or landmarks, constantly fixated on his smartphone's screen. He often stayed back at the hotel, using his brother's laptop. On a day the group went to Lake Kawaguchi near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Seizing the opportunity, Grant hacked into Jeremy's account and withdrew thousands of dollars, spending it all on private sessions with his favorite webcam model. Jeremy discovered the theft later, but initially suspected fraud. He couldn't pinpoint the culprit and continued to investigate the incident after returning home, unaware that Grant was responsible. Sylvia Venceslavova, Sylvie. Now let's delve into the most intriguing part, the identity of the mysterious webcam model who became an obsession for Grant. On a site where Grant paid for private online interactions with various women, he met the stunning Sylvia Venceslavova from Bulgaria, known as Sylvie. She captivated him with her striking looks, confidence, charisma, and passion. Sylvie made Grant feel special, loved, desired, and unique. He began to believe that her feelings for him were genuine, and they could have a real relationship. Grant was convinced they were in a relationship, and he needed to win over this fiery brunette from all her other admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars daily to ensure she had no time for other men. Grant also showered her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she would wear during their video chats. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant constantly fabricated stories, losing touch with reality. He claimed to live alone in a large house, own a successful business, and could afford to lavish her with money. He backed up his claims with money transfers, initially sending a couple of $1,000s, then $10,000 and even $100,000 as a birthday gift. Naturally, Grant's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed by his parents, as he was using their accounts. At first, he explained it as investments in his own online project to attract an audience, but Chad and Margaret quickly realized their son was lying. Scandal, escape, and rehab clinic. A serious family dispute erupted at home. The patriarch demanded that the youngest son immediately pack his things and leave, but his mother and Cody intervened on Grant's behalf. The family understood that Grant was suffering from severe internet addiction. However, they were baffled about how he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A thorough search in his room uncovered vials of potent substances. Grant explained he used them to keep from going insane. The parents announced they would cut off his access to their accounts and intended to send him for mandatory treatment for drug and internet addiction. In response, Grant declared he was tired of everything and ready to end his life. He then dashed out of the house, jumped into his car, and sped away at high speed in an unknown direction. Later it was discovered that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, crashed through their fence, and hit the garage wall. Aware of the turmoil in the Amato family, his relatives sympathized with him and offered him a place to stay until things settled. He readily agreed, but robbed his kind-hearted relatives the next day, stealing thousands of dollars from their accounts to pay for interactions with Sylvie. When Grant's aunt informed his parents, they asked her not to call the police, promising to resolve the situation and return the stolen money. That same day, Chad personally went to their house and took Grant, who urgently needed intervention. Chad, Margaret, and Cody realized that reasoning with him was futile, and if he left home, he would likely commit theft again. They then presented Grant with a different ultimatum. Either he would go to a rehabilitation clinic for treatment of his addictions or face jail time for theft. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to enter the clinic, where he would spend 2 months away from any temptations. He was admitted to the medical institution at the end of December 2018. The grown man's little secret. While Grant was in treatment, his parents checked his computer and discovered where their son was spending thousands of dollars daily from their family accounts. They found the profile of Sylvie, the woman who had deeply affected their son, reviewed their correspondence, and found hundreds of recordings of their intimate private online interactions that Grant treasured and often revisited. The Amatos decided to inform Sylvie that her admirer, who had showered her with money and gifts, was not a businessman, but an ordinary unemployed man with drug and internet addictions. They also pointed out that the funds Grant transferred to her were stolen, potentially subjecting him to criminal charges. However, Sylvie remained indifferent. As for her, it was just a job, and she had no intention of returning the money. The unexpected return. On January 5, 2019, just a couple of weeks into his treatment, Grant made an abrupt return home, having completed less than a quarter of the necessary rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he was noted for his complete lack of compliance. Grant tearfully vowed to turn his life around and find employment, but threatened to end his life if forced to return to the rehab center. His parents agreed, but laid down strict rules. Grant was barred from using the computer, had to follow a strict schedule, and all his earnings were closely monitored. Additionally, he was given a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For about 3 weeks, Grant seemed to comply, leading his parents to believe he had matured and left his addictions behind. However, everything changed on Thursday, January 24th, 2019, when Grant persuaded his mother to let him use the laptop briefly to check his email and post his resume online, hoping to find a more ambitious job than his current warehouse position. Margaret trusted her son and allowed him to use the laptop, making a fatal mistake. Naturally, Grant first tried to contact Sylvie, only to discover that his parents had already written to her, exposing the truth about him. He saw this as a betrayal. Moreover, his parents had humiliated him in front of the only woman he loved, and they had to pay for that. The brutal takedown of family. Remember the previously mentioned home gun collection? Chad had kept it in a special large safe, the key to which he trusted no one. However, Grant knew about another gun stored in his parents' bedroom, always kept loaded by his father, and it was this gun he decided to use. His mother was sitting at the computer in the home office when her youngest son quietly approached her from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The position of her body suggested she didn't even have time to turn around or understand what was happening. Next was his father, who was about to return home from work. As soon as Chad entered the kitchen, he was confronted face to face with Grant and immediately received 2 bullets to the chest. Grant tensely contemplated his next move, devising an even more monstrous plan. He decided to frame his own brother Cody, the only person who had always stood up for him, helped him, and been his best friend. By then, Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girlfriend. To lure Cody home, Grant used his now-deceased father's phone to send several messages asking him to come home immediately because something terrible had happened. He didn't elaborate, confident that this information would be enough to make his brother rush home from work. Grant's calculation was correct, and Cody indeed arrived, even leaving work early. Entering the house, he only made it to the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor before being shot and collapsing. Cody didn't die instantly. He had time to realize the horror of the situation, but was powerless to change it. After eliminating his family, Grant coldly wiped his fingerprints off the pistol, placed the weapon in his brother's hand to leave his prints, and then left it next to the body, making it look as if Cody had shot their parents and then himself. The rest of the evening, the killer calmly packed his things, downloaded video files of his communications with Sylvie from the computer, and even texted the girl. Having finished his affairs, he loaded his essentials into the car and drove away. Arrest and trial. It took the police just over a day to track down and arrest Grant, who was hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He wasn't surprised, more disappointed that he was found so quickly, but he vehemently denied any guilt. During his interrogation at the station, he spun unbelievable tales about his father's incredible cruelty, alleging mistreatment towards him, his mother, and brother. Grant also spoke of his father's attempts to separate him from his beloved girlfriend Sylvie, whom he claimed to share true and pure love with. Regarding the events at their family home on the evening of January 24, 2019, his account was confusing and inconsistent. He suggested that his father and brother had a fight, Cody grabbed a gun, and ended Chad's life, with Margaret being an accidental victim. Grant claimed he could only guess the chronology of these horrific events, as he wasn't a witness himself, stating he spent the night in his car with his belongings after his father kicked him out. In the morning, he said he simply drove away, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded at home. His story sounded disjointed and implausible, and the evidence indirectly pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. As a result, Grant was arrested as the primary suspect in the triple homicide of his family members. He was held on a $750,000 bond, which he was unable to post, and thus remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial commenced on July 15, 2019. Notably, almost all witnesses who testified in court spoke against Grant, including his older brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had stolen money from during their trip to Japan. Those who knew the defendant personally described him as prone to various addictions, a pathological thief, and a liar. The main piece of evidence against Grant was a significant bank transfer from Chad's account to his younger sons. This transaction occurred late at night when all family members were already deceased. To confirm the transaction, the defendant had used his deceased father's finger for identification. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, while his defense argued that Grant was ill and needed treatment. The final verdict was delivered on August 12, 2019. The court found 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of first-degree triple homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
Jeremy Ogden, a detective with the Hobart, Indiana Police Department, leaned over his desk, staring at a manuscript that had kept him busy for years. The diary bore witness to a tragic story involving 53-year-old Christopher Regan. Christopher Regan was born in Detroit, Michigan. In this city, he lived his early years, and there he received his education. When he reached the age of 20, he decided to join the ranks of those who were willing to defend their country. Christopher found his true calling and devoted himself to the service of his country. With honor and devotion, he stood guard over the peace of the citizens. This choice forever determined his fate. Christopher was sent to a military base located near the cozy town of Marquette. Here, on the military base, not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the cozy town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they saw each other and sympathy arose at first sight. Young people often met on the streets of the city and embarrassed to say hello, and over time began to walk together. Communication became more and more frequent and closer, and eventually grew into friendship. For several years, they remained only close friends because the service in the Army did not leave Christopher the opportunity to build a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state, but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer, and in December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always observed the line of propriety. Terry happily agreed. After a short time, the lovers realized that they had many common interests: a love of nature, a preference for a measured lifestyle, a thirst for tranquility. That's why Iron River became the perfect place for both of them. The couple made the decision to live together. Christopher moved in with Terry, found a job at a factory producing parts for military ships, and soon he had his own subordinates. Life was shaping up in the best possible way. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As young people did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Iron River seemed too small, and Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here he found not only a job, but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In a new city, Chris was about to start his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk, as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was worried. She tried calling him for several days. Concerned, she contacted mutual friends, but they knew nothing.
10 days later, a worried Terry filed a police report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was accepted, but the police were quick to comfort Terry, assuring her that people sometimes disappear for a while and then return, sometimes even ending up in other places. At the police station, Terry also revealed that Christopher had recently received a job offer in North Carolina. For the police, this was reason not to be too concerned, suggesting that he may have made it to his new residence and decided to start a new life, severing all ties to the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, astonishingly, no information could be obtained. Christopher had not shown up for work in 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search forces headed into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to reinforce the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him. Perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to lean toward the idea that all of this might be connected to the crime. After inspecting Regan's home, it was decided to start searching for him on a larger scale. The police looked carefully through the neighborhood and finally found Regan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It was unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally. They had to break one of the doors to get inside the car. There was nothing suspicious in the interior. On the seat were ordinary clothes, such as those often found among locals: hat, coat, gloves. However, one of the policemen carefully noticed on the front passenger seat a small piece of yellow paper with a route written on it. It was decided to follow the route indicated in the note. There was no specific address on the paper, but the route was described in detail. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that, judging from the detailed notes, This was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper. This route took them to a neighboring town. Stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes, the investigators knocked on the door. They needed to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife, Kelly, soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Regan, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well, and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages. She received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. Investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car.
Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation was a conversation with Christopher's co-workers. The detectives went to the factory where they interviewed workers and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors had been circulating for months. This statement sparked interest, and investigators decided to re-interview the Cochran couple and clarify what was really going on in their relationship. In the end, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher did have an affair, but she was unable to disclose it the previous time because of her husband's presence. She and Jason, she said, have an open relationship, and Jason is generally okay with his wife's affairs on the side. However, the topic was sensitive and may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers, for their part, refuted Kelly's words. They stated that Jason was far from approving of the affair, and there was no loose relationship in the Cochran family, as Kelly claimed. Following Kelly into the police office was Jason himself. A conversation with him unequivocally revealed that he was adamantly opposed to his spouse's infidelity. This position made him a suspect. Nevertheless, the lack of conclusive evidence made it impossible to conclude that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance. The officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious mystery remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator who immediately began actively working on it. The first order of business, Hobart Police Department Detective Jeremy Ogden began a thorough analysis of the Cochran family's history. Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and immediately after graduation, they began living together. The two were completely different in personality. Kelly was open, socially adept, and loved to talk. Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity. He never started a conversation first, only answering questions asked of him. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married. After the wedding, the couple started their own company, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it brought them a decent income. Most of the pool maintenance work was taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health. The man began to have back problems, and every day he felt heavier and heavier. One day he realized that he was unable to continue the business. That's when Kelly took over all the work of running the business. It was a difficult period, but she trusted that her husband would soon recover and return to his duties. While his condition was getting worse day by day and the medical drugs were not bringing the desired relief, Kelly looked for all ways to help her husband recover. One day, she learned about a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. There was a chance, although its use in medical practice had only recently begun. It wasn't available everywhere, especially since it was banned in the state where they lived. For Kelly and Jason, the only way to get the drug was to move. They chose Michigan and moved to Iron River Township in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult with a doctor and get a prescription for a miracle plant. Finally, his agony was going to be over. So, in early 2014, the plant, which specializes in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, brought a new employee, 34-year-old Kelly Cochran, who had moved with her husband Jason to the area. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and the couple took a job at the same plant where Christopher Regan worked.
Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This companionship was of particular importance to Christopher, who had recently been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. After reviewing all the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case to a judge in Michigan to obtain a search warrant for the Cochrans' home. After successfully obtaining a ruling, the very next day, March 6, the prosecutor sent a team of investigators to the couple's residence. The search of the Cochran house was conducted with special care, trying to find any traces indicating the possible involvement of Kelly and Jason in the disappearance of Christopher. However, all efforts were in vain. The only important find was a book, authored by Jason. He used a pseudonym from the world of video games. The title of the work caused a smile, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described murder scenes of everyone who had ever wronged him. The detectives read the book from cover to cover and noticed one of the characters that matched Christopher's characteristics exactly. Suspicions about Jason grew stronger. Perhaps he wasn't making up the crimes, but was inspired by real events he had committed. Given the heightened suspicions, it was decided 3 weeks later to conduct another search of the Cochran house. The investigation hoped to uncover evidence that might have been missed in the previous search. When police officers drove up to the Cochrans' home, they found that no cars were in sight and the yard and driveway were empty. Attempts to knock on the door were fruitless. No one opened the door. It turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried because they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples instead. Ready to help, the Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home. The couple, for their part, did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder. Nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher Regan. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived on the scene where Kelly, in a state of utter panic, obstructed doctors. However, it soon became clear that Jason would no longer require assistance. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning with fire as if from extreme overheating. The doctors were forced to confirm his death. The body was sent for forensic examination. Kelly was handed over to a police patrol who took her to relatives who lived nearby, down the same street. Determined to find out the circumstances of what happened, investigators searched the Cochrans' new home. During the search, one of the officers discovered a syringe needle at the foot of the marital bed. After evaluating the condition of Jason's body, the investigator concluded that his death was caused by abuse of illegal substances. However, the forensic report came as a surprise to the detectives. Although Jason was found to have an excessive amount of illegal substances in his system, the forensic results pointed to something more shocking. Jason's death was caused by strangulation, as confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. Thus, Jason, the prime suspect in the kidnapping of Christopher Regan, was himself a victim of the crime. This discovery led to new questions and a re-examination of the evidence. Forensic experts immediately turned their attention to Kelly Cochran, who seemed to be the link between the two crimes. Now she was to become the prime suspect not only in Christopher's disappearance, but also in her husband's murder. This investigation became an even more complex puzzle. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the course of the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden encountered Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's, who, upon learning of the horrific incident from Kelly herself, immediately rushed to the police. Walter emphasized that illegal drugs could not be the cause of Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and he would certainly tell him about any changes in his life. Moreover, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs with the sole purpose of getting rid of the back pain that had accompanied him for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been in a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his worries with him, saying that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana because of suspicions of the Iron River Police in their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had happened had greatly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and tried to take his own life, which required serious treatment. Walter also noted a distinct change in his friend's behavior. Kelly began to take more and more control over his life. It seemed that Jason was constantly on edge. Whereas before the boys could spend hours playing video games together, Jason now began to avoid parties as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became an important link in the investigation and allowed investigators to understand what was going on in the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Regan. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. Walter accepted a difficult role. He was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea. And this came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. However, despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her. But she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators. It was like a mockery of justice. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran.
Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 busy days full of anxiety and turmoil, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to find out that Kelly Cochran was off the west coast of the United States. She had cleverly eluded the police and traveled to Kentucky, to the town of Wingo, located more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective contacted the local police, warning that upon discovering Kelly, they should arrest her, exercising extreme caution given her potential danger. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house. Knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts, they acted quickly and without warning. That afternoon, Kelly Cochran was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he resumed interviews with the suspect along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, everything became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Regan was much deeper and more serious than everyone thought. She felt true love for him. Kelly dreamed of leaving this cursed city and starting a new life with him. But everything changed on October 13th, 2015, when Jason found out about her cheating. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke. But Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14th, 2015, Christopher Regan arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy their encounter while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan. Their evening promised to be special. The lovers had dinner and, according to Kelly, went up to the second floor of the house, but their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso. The perpetrators placed the remains in several trash bags and then disposed of them by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it.
The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects. One of them was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Regan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Regan and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession. In court, however, she presented a different version. According to her, she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day and caught the lovers off guard. Then he grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Regan. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial, as a plea agreement was reached, and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. There she is, serving her sentence, and only regrets that her personal life did not work out. In one phone interview, Kelly stated, "I tried to do what I thought was right. You go to school, you go to college, then you get married," Kelly Cochran shares in an interview. "It was good in the beginning, but in the end, all my efforts were in vain. All I did was work all the time while my husband entertained himself with computer games."
Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her creamies. She claims that she and Jason committed more creamies and Christopher is just one of their many victims. The details, names, and additional crimes Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in hopes that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story.